The first thing that caught my attention wasn't the shattered fence. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that feels wrong on a ranch once filled with laughter, barking dogs, and the sound of a man's voice carrying across wide open fields. It settled around me the moment I stepped out of my truck, thick and unfamiliar, like something important had disappeared. And it wasn't only the broken strands of barbed wire. I hadn't returned here in years. Not since my closest friend Jake vanished from town without saying goodbye and carried a piece of my life away with him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet ways life pulls people back together, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this remind us of things we often forget. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the crooked wooden posts and rusted wire hanging unevenly across the dry ground. The fence leaned tiredly, like it had finally stopped trying to keep things together. Maybe just like everything else out here. Then I saw her, Jake's mother. She stepped slowly off the porch, drying her hands on an old cloth, her blonde hair loosely tied back with strands slipping around her face like she no longer cared enough to fix them. She looked older, naturally, but it wasn't only age. It was something deeper, something heavier. Grief changes people in ways no reflection can ever show. She smiled when she noticed me, but the warmth didn't fully reach her eyes. I remembered that smile. It used to shine brighter. I walked toward her carefully, uncertain what to say, uncertain why my chest felt so tight, like I was stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. She didn't hug me immediately, only studied my face like she was searching for the boy I used to be inside the man standing before her. Then she finally spoke, simple and gentle, like no years had passed at all. "Finish the fence, and I'll make lunch." That was all she said. No mention of Jake. No mention of the missing years. Just a fence and lunch. But there was something in her voice that told me it meant far more than that. I nodded quietly and grabbed my tools from the truck. The metal rattled softly in my hands as I walked back toward the broken posts. The sun had already climbed higher into the sky, throwing long shadows across the dry grass, and the air smelled like dust and old memories. Fixing a fence isn't difficult. You measure, tighten, hammer, and pull. But that day, every movement felt heavier, like every wire I stretched was connected to something inside me I hadn't touched in years. Jake and I had built this fence together once before. We were barely 18 then, laughing more than working, arguing about who was stronger and who could pull the wire tighter. His father had stood nearby, shaking his head with the quiet pride fathers carry when they watch their sons becoming men. His father is gone now. I already knew that much. Heart attack 2 years earlier. Jake never even returned for the funeral. That part had never settled right with me. I crouched down and gripped the wire with my pliers, pulling it firmly against the post. My hands moved on instinct, muscle memory doing the work, but my thoughts drifted elsewhere. Why had she called me? After all this time, after everything that happened, why me? The sound of boots crunching over gravel pulled me from my thoughts. She walked closer and stopped a few feet behind me, her shadow stretching across the ground beside mine. At first she said nothing, only watched quietly. There was something hidden in that silence, something waiting to be spoken, something heavy between us. I kept working without turning around. After a while she slowly walked back toward the house. I noticed her absence immediately, like the air itself changed once she was gone. Time dragged beneath the hot sun. Sweat rolled down my back, soaking through my shirt while dust clung to my skin. Little by little the fence started taking shape again, straightening, tightening, becoming something sturdy again, something dependable, something capable of holding together. Around noon, she returned again. This time, she held a glass of water in her hand. Without saying anything, she passed it to me quietly. Our fingers touched for just a second, and I noticed how different her hands felt now. They weren't soft like they used to be. Years of hard living had made them rougher, stronger, but there was sadness in them too, the kind loneliness leaves behind. I took a drink, letting the cold water soothe the dryness in my throat. For a second, I almost spoke, almost asked about Jake, almost asked why she had reached out to me after all these years. But the words stayed trapped inside because part of me feared hearing the truth. She lingered beside me for another moment before finally speaking in a low voice, like she wasn't even sure she should say it. "You were the only person he ever trusted with this place." My hand tightened around the glass as I looked at her. But her eyes weren't looking at me. They stayed fixed on the fence ahead. He always said that if something ever happened, you'd come back. The words landed harder than I expected. I turned away quickly and focused on the wire again, pulling it tighter than necessary. Jake hadn't left for no reason. We'd fought, the worst kind of fight, the kind where angry words stay hanging in the air long after they're spoken. He wanted to leave town, chase a bigger future somewhere else. I couldn't understand it back then. To me, it felt like he was turning his back on everything, his family, this land, the life we built together. I said things I regret even now. He threw words back at me too. Then he left without another word. No goodbye, no second glance. And I never followed him. That was the part that stayed with me all these years. I could have gone after him, but I didn't. Why now? I finally asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She paused before answering. Then she looked at me, and for the first time I saw something beyond grief in her eyes. Hope. Because he called. My heart stumbled in my chest. I turned toward her completely. When? I asked. Last week. For a moment, everything around me seemed to slow down. He asked about the fence, she continued softly, her voice shaking a little. Said it always bothered him when it wasn't straight. I released a breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. Jake still remembered. After all this time, he remembered. He said if it ever needed fixing, you'd know how to do it right. I looked back at the fence, my vision blurring for a second, though I refused to let it show. That stubborn fool. He hadn't forgotten any more than I had. We stood there quietly again, but now the silence felt different. It didn't feel hollow anymore, only unfinished, like the fence in front of us, like everything left unresolved between us. After a while, she turned and headed back toward the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the steady sound of work. By the time I hammered in the final staple and stepped back, the fence stood tall and straight once more. It stretched across the property with purpose, like something still worth protecting. I wiped my hands against my jeans and stared at it for a long time before finally turning and walking slowly toward the house. The smell of dinner reached me before I even made it to the front steps. Real homemade food. The kind that takes hours to prepare. The kind that instantly reminds you of family. When I walked inside, for a moment it felt like time had frozen. The same old wooden table, the same faded curtains, the same warmth in the room, only softer somehow. She stood by the stove finishing the last few things. When she looked over her shoulder at me, her smile came easier this time, gentler than before. Sit down, she said quietly. I pulled out a chair and sat. At first we ate without speaking, not because it was uncomfortable, but because we were both being careful, like people trying not to damage something already fragile. Halfway through the meal, she opened a drawer and took out a small folded note. Without saying a word, she slid it across the table toward me. My chest tightened before I even unfolded it. Somehow, I already knew what it was. Inside was a phone number and a short handwritten message. Call me when you finally fix that fence, Jay. My fingers shook a little as I stared down at the paper. After all those years and all that silence between us, somehow life had brought us back to this exact place again. If this story means something to you, even just a little, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone. You never know who might need to hear a story like this today. And before this ends, I want to ask you something personal. Tell me in the comments, have you ever lost someone you cared about because neither of you spoke first? Because sometimes the hardest fences to repair are not built from wood or nails. I stayed at that table long after we finished eating, the note still resting in my hand. She never rushed me or tried to fill the silence. She simply looked at me with the same calm understanding in her eyes. Eventually, I pushed my chair back and stood. I should get going, I murmured. She nodded and walked me to the front door. Just before I stepped outside, she gently touched my arm. He never stopped caring about you, she whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Neither did I said softly. And for the first time in years, admitting those words out loud felt different, like something deep inside me had finally started to heal, like maybe what was broken didn't have to stay broken forever. I walked slowly back to my truck while the evening sun dipped lower across the horizon, covering everything in a soft golden glow. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring down at the number in my hand. My thumb hovered above my phone screen. It would have been so easy to drive away again, to leave the past untouched and pretend none of it mattered. But I had already made that mistake once. and I knew exactly where that road ended. So I inhaled deeply and made the call. The phone rang once, then twice, then a third time. Finally, a voice answered, familiar and unchanged by time. Hello. For a moment, I couldn't force the words out. Years of silence, and everything left unsaid suddenly sat heavy on my chest. And now the chance to change it was finally here. It's me, I said at last. There was silence for a brief second. Then I heard a sharp breath on the other side of the line. Took you long enough, he replied. And just like that, the wall between us still existed, but it no longer felt impossible to cross. Sometimes healing doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it simply begins with finally reaching back.